Okay, so this will be a long COVID video about the symptoms, right? I don't know what everyone's symptoms are. I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to get into my symptoms and what they have been. This isn't to give a list of complaints. This isn't my way of seeking medical advice. This isn't um, me giving you medical advice for specific symptoms. It's just letting you know what my symptoms have been. So maybe you can relate and maybe it'll help you have a better understanding of this video series and what it's for and how it can be helpful to you if you're experiencing these kind of symptoms. All right. So I'll kind of give you a progression of where I've gone when long COVID started for me. Well, I didn't know it was long COVID. I thought it was going to be over very quickly because it was the second time I had COVID, right? And it hit really, really hard. It started off as some mild flu-like symptoms and in a few days progressed to very, very low energy. I couldn't hardly walk down the hallway. I couldn't make it up or down a set of stairs. Getting out of bed made me out of breath. Taking a shower was something I had to do sitting down most of the time. You know, very, very low level of activity. I had a lot of serious flu-like symptoms, but these things went away. That wasn't part of my long COVID for very long, right? What I found also was that my anxiety increased. I'm not someone who's very anxious or fearful. I tend to be kind of fearless, and that annoys my wife, where she says sometimes I lack common sense because of the boldness I would have. And what long COVID did to me was cause anxiety to where I would have invasive thoughts many times, fearful thoughts, and it would make it difficult for me to be calm and relaxed many times because loud sounds, unexpected sounds would startle me, would make me feel very anxious, and would make my heart race and would cause my body to shake. Okay, and then shakiness is another thing that has been a part of this. Right now, my hands are not too shaky, but if I do any sort of physical activity, my hands get really shaky. First thing in the morning when I wake up, I'm very, very shaky. And it makes it difficult to do things like fix breakfast or draw. I like to draw, and it's hard to do that when my hands are so shaky. I remember in the early months of my long COVID, I couldn't hardly draw at all. It was very frustrating, right? And then it has affected my mental capacity too. You probably notice that sometimes in the video where it seems like I'm searching for words, and that's not who I normally would be. But since long COVID, I found that my memory, my recall, my focus have all been affected, and it gets worse some days and better some days. And I have ways of dealing with that. I'll get into that in some of the other videos. It's affected as well my breathing. There's been a lot of respiratory problems. Many, many times I feel like I can hardly breathe. Now, this was worse in the early days of COVID. As I said in my first video, I've had long COVID now for over a year. So the first 6 or 7 months of it, the breathing was a big problem, and I would um, have to take steroids to deal with that a lot of times. And I wouldn't be able to breathe very well. I feel like my throat's constricted. If I was wearing a button shirt like this, if I had the buttons all the way buttoned up many times, I'd have to undo that after a few minutes just because it'd feel restricted. If I was wearing a tie, I'd have to wear it quite loose. And this is something that had been a persistent problem for many months. It's gotten better, but on my bad health days, the breathing definitely becomes a problem again. Another persistent problem that I've had all the way through my long COVID experience is chest pain. And in my case, it's been something that occurs when I exert myself, when I do some sort of physical activity, and then particularly when I talk for a while or talk loud. So in these videos, I will talk pretty quiet because it's still something I deal with a lot. So if I talk for a while or I talk loudly, chest pain starts to build up and get worse and worse and worse to where it is excruciating if I continue to talk. And what will happen many times is these kinds of symptoms will catch up with me. At this stage in my long COVID, I'm doing some activity. I'm doing some public speaking with my church. I'm um, I'm driving my family around. I'm doing some housework, some laundry, some washing dishes. I'm working in homeless ministry, going out on the streets and doing a little bit of that, doing some exercises, doing a little bit of walking, right? And so what happens is I may feel good while I'm doing these things, and once I stop and I rest myself, all of that catches up with me. And sometimes I feel good for most of a day, and so I do a little bit more probably than I should, and the next day it really catches up with me, and I feel really debilitated. So my long COVID experience has been up and down, and some days it's good days, and some days it's bad days, and that's probably the same way it is for you. And what I'll deal with in this video series a lot of times is how to deal with that depression, how to deal with the ups and downs. But I just want to kind of give you a little overview of my symptoms, what I've gone through. It's just a quick look at it, not super detailed. A lot of this is stuff that I've told to my friends and family members, right? And there's a lot more to it. I'm not going to tax myself too hard trying to recall the entire progression, but I just want to give you a kind of a snapshot of what I've dealt with. Maybe you've dealt with some of the same things, and I know long COVID is different for different people. I know of people who were completely debilitated and went from living a normal active life to having to be in a wheelchair, and that's not been my situation. I know some people have had their olfactory senses, their ability to smell seriously affected to where scents drive them crazy. That's not been a problem for me at all. And then I know people who've had some mild symptoms similar to mine, but not as severe. So you may be in a different space with this, experiencing some different symptoms. Let me just tell you, I empathize with you. I know at least some of what you're going through, and I hope this video series is helpful to you.